Site design and the 3 clicks rule. Before you actually finalize your sitemap, let's think in more detail about how a good direct response website should be organized. Our first rule forbids the use of external links. Therefore, you can eliminate any links pages, sidebars with site affiliates, advertising banners, or such things from your sitemap. Although selling advertising space on your website may seem like a good idea for building revenue, it distracts your viewers from your central goal, selling the product. So, keep it simple and leave the advertising off. Our second rule dictates that content on your site should be limited to only that which is essential for persuading people to buy your product. The policy that goes along with this rule is to consolidate most of your site's information onto as few pages as possible. This reduces the chance that viewers will come to your page, click a link that takes them to another page on your site about your product's features, and then forget to come back to your main page to actually buy the product. Of course, there are situations where you'll want to divide your content among several smaller web pages on your site, as opposed to putting everything on one massive index page. If you have a wide variety of technical data about your product, as well as photos and testimonials, you run the risk of boring your viewer long before he gets to the crucial buy link. So follow this guideline. If your viewers don't have to scroll down more than 1 or 2 times in order to read all of your product information, put everything on a single index page. If you have to scroll down too often to read all of your site content, then split the content into separate pages. But make use of pop-up windows in order to keep your main page open, or make sure that there's a link to your actual buy page in a prominent place on every one of your subpages. Above all, remember our third rule. Keep it simple, stupid. One easy guideline for doing this is to follow the 3 clicks rule. Upon arriving at your site, your viewers should never have to click more than 3 links in order to buy your product. One way to implement the 3 clicks rule might be this. Your viewers start at an index page that describes the product information. They then click a next link to take them to a page about prices and ordering information. Then they click a link to start ordering the product. That's 2 clicks in total. Another way to implement the 3 clicks rule, your viewers start at an index page that talks in general terms about the product. They click on one of your subpages, features, testimonials, pricing, etc., whatever best suits your specific product, to learn more about the product. Then they click on a Buy Now button to learn about pricing, and then they click on a button to begin ordering the product. 3 clicks. There are any number of other possible configurations. Experiment with your sitemap until you come up with something that gets across all your information while maintaining the same simplicity. Your customers will thank you, and you'll thank yourself when you see the sales figures. Commerce system. The one site feature that you're unlikely to be able to provide on your own is a working system for buying products, sending shipping orders, and transferring customers' payments to your account. Systems like this are extremely complicated to code, difficult to integrate into a page, and above all, risky in terms of security. You don't want to take a chance on building your own commerce system from scratch, starting to take customer orders, and then finding out that someone has hacked your system and reduced your business bank account to 0. You have 2 options for getting around this problem. Hiring a very, very good coder with experience in this area, which we'll talk about more in the next chapter, or going with a proprietary coding system. The former option, hiring an experienced coder and building your system from scratch, is riskier and costlier up front, but has some advantages in terms of site design and simplifying your accounting operations. The latter option, using a proprietary system, is safer in terms of site security and more familiar to many users who tend to use systems like PayPal or BitPass for several different types of online purchases, but also comes with a price, hefty transaction fees, and possible content restrictions. Which you choose is up to you, but if you think you have an excellent coder and a good system for taking in revenue, go with the former option. You'll lose some money up front, but you'll tend to gain more in the long term in saved transaction fees. Bells and whistles. Once you have your basic site design, you have a skeleton, and a skeleton is nothing without flesh. We'll talk more about developing your text content in a later chapter, but at this point, we'll think in terms of the basic look and feel of your page. images, sounds, and flash effects that you may want to use in order to enhance the look of your page and build your business's personal identity. Here are some good rules to follow. Use graphics that you already use in promoting your business as a basic template for site design. This builds a brand identity for you, which can be invaluable in attracting customers and building sales. Don't get too complicated. Too many beginning web designers feel the need to show off their skills, drag every HTML, CSS trick they know out in order to make a flashy, impressive page, and end up with an inconsistent mess that drives customers away. Choose a simple look for your page with a few colors and a general feel, and either communicate this to your coder or build it yourself. Avoid music on your page unless you're actually selling CDs, instruments, or audio equipment. Music is often irritating to web surfers, makes your page load more slowly, and doesn't add much to your online image. Keep load times on your page low. Any images you use should be optimized for web use. A good Photoshop tutorial or an experienced web designer coder can tell you how to do this. Background images should be avoided whenever possible, and complicated scripts running on your page, counters, message boards, or Java effects should be kept to a minimum or eliminated entirely. Every second your viewers spend waiting for a page to load is a second in which they can easily decide that your product isn't worth the effort. Avoid this at all costs. So now you've mapped out your site with an eye to the rules of direct response design, you've decided on the images your page will use and the basic look of your site, and you've made some preliminary steps to deciding on what commerce system you'll use. At this point, it's time to start laying bricks, as the builders say. And even if you plan to hire a coder to build your site for you, as many people choose to, it's a good idea to know a little bit about what materials your page will depend on. In the next chapter, we'll learn just that. 4. DIY site coding. For some of you, this will be the best chapter in this book. For others of you, this will be a temporary detour into an interesting world, but not the one that you'll need to know everything about in order to be successful with direct response websites. For both groups, much of this information will be helpful. If you know something about how web pages actually work, then you'll know what to ask for and what not to ask for when it comes to hiring a coder to build your website. If you want something from your page that standard HTML can't deliver, you may find yourself facing extra charges for CSS or even Flash design, or you may find yourself striving to build a page that simply can't be built with current technology. And if you're not familiar with exactly how computers interpret and display website code, then you may run into costly revisions down the road when customers complain that your website doesn't work with their browser, as well as lost sales. So if you're interested in building your direct response site yourself, this is the place to start. If you're more interested in saving yourself some effort and hiring a coder, definitely familiarize yourself with a few of these terms before moving on to the next chapter, where we talk in detail about how to find, retain, and communicate with your coder in order to build the best web page possible. How web pages work. All web pages and websites on the Internet exist fundamentally as text files saved with the HTML extension. Web browsers read these text files, decide based on them and based on HTML defaults which formatting choices to use on a page, generate all content from the text file and link to all images, and ultimately display the page. Of course, it's impossible to talk to a web browser in natural language. Saying in plain language, make the margins 1 inch on all sides, is easy to understand for a human layout editor, but impossible for a computer. Which is why, as we touched on in the first chapter, standard protocols for online systems were a necessary condition for the growth of the Internet. In order for two computers to talk to one another, and in order to ensure that they're talking in the way that the user intends, it's necessary to speak a common language, which is essentially what HTML and other Internet protocols are. HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, is the most successful online formatting protocol yet devised, and should be the basis for any good website. It's also a fairly simple language to learn, as opposed to object-oriented languages like Java or C+, which require a much greater working knowledge of computers and much greater willingness to spend time organizing a program. HTML is essentially a formatting guideline rather than a true programming language, which explains some of its versatility and ease of use. So in order to learn DIY coding, or how to learn to talk intelligently to your web designer, we first have to learn some key features of HTML. Key HTML tags. When you view an HTML file in a web browser, the computer follows this logic to interpret your file. Files are read in order from beginning to end. If the file contains a tag, change the formatting rules to reflect that tag until the tag is closed. If the file doesn't contain a tag, format the text according to HTML standards and browser options, most commonly 12-point Times New Roman. A tag is just a formatting instruction to your computer. A tag would look something like this: less than sign, the word tag, and the greater than sign, then, the less than sign, backslash tag, and the greater than sign. Where tag tells the computer to start formatting according to the tag, and the backslash tag tells it to stop formatting according to the tag, there's a little bit more to it, of course, and a good HTML tutorial can help you with some of the finer points of this. But essentially, this is all that tags are: formatting instructions. Think of an HTML document as a document in a foreign language, with your browser as the translator. The most important tag in any HTML file is the HTML tag. The first line of any HTML file is always the HTML tag, and the last line is always the \HTML tag. This tells the computer that any information between these tags should be interpreted according to the standard HTML rules as coded into the web browser. The second most important tag in any HTML file is the body tag. Any information within the body tag will be displayed with the browser window when the web page is loaded. The critical tag that complements the body tag is the head tag, which determines information that the browser should know about the content of the page, most commonly the title tag, to determine the information to be displayed in the title bar of the browser window, and the meta tag to give information on the page's content to search engines. A full discussion of the meta tag is well beyond the scope of this book, but will be dealt with in a bit more detail in the marketing chapter. The most commonly seen tag in most HTML files is the p tag, which appears only in the body section of the file, as will all of the tags below. The p tag tells the browser to start a new paragraph of text, including a full line break between paragraphs. Within the p tag, it's possible to place other formatting tags, including the b tag, the i tag, and the u tag, which declare bold text, italic text, and underlined text, respectively. If you're not doing your own coding, just know that you can use tags to modify the appearance of text in order to emphasize certain key words in your sales letters or other content. Often a useful marketing tactic. The IMG tag is used to place an image in a document. The image tag contains within it the web address of the image to be placed. For example, yourbusiness.com/yourgraphic.jpg, as well as optional rules for resizing the image to whatever height and weight you want, allowing you to include even large images like photographs on your main page. The A tag is placed around an element on the page, usually either text or an image, to turn that element into a hyperlink to another section of the page. This is most commonly used to connect pages to one another or to allow you to view larger photos at their full size. You might resize a 1200 by 900 pixel photo to 120 by 90 pixels on your main page, but at the same time turn that picture into a link. Customers can then click on the picture, which will allow them to view the picture at full size in a new window. The table tag is used for displaying text or other page elements in pages on your page. A common use of the table tag is also to control the layout of your page. If the table borders are set to 0, consult an HTML reference to find out how to do this, you're going the DIY route. You can create the illusion of small text fields throughout your page. Think of a newspaper with various columns, photos, and advertisements laid out on a single page, with the table tag trick versus a single page of a book without the table tag trick. And finally, but perhaps most importantly, if you're building your own commerce system, or if you're trying to include user feedback and testimonials on your site, there's the form tag. This allows users to input text on your page, click on buttons, or select items from a drop-down list, an ideal way to keep your page simple while still giving your customers the maximum possible options. The form tag can be extremely tricky for HTML novices and can also create some security problems on your page if used improperly. Be sure to consult a good reference and to experiment before you start using this tag on your main page. Tags in different browsers. To return to the translator metaphor, not all translators are equally good at what they do. Any fan of the world of literature knows that the same basic text can come out in wildly different ways when translated by different people, and the same is just as true for browsers. A few tags in particular can create problems if your site is designed for one browser but viewed by a potential customer in another browser altogether. The table tag is notorious for these kinds of problems, and while the form tag will usually behave in the same way across different browsers, it may have a radically different appearance for different users and not always one that you like. There are two solutions to this problem. One is simply to test your page in as many browsers, screen solutions, and operating systems as you possibly can, and tinkering with your basic HTML code to the point where it looks acceptable and works in the way you intend for most of these. The other solution is to choose one or two popular browsers to focus on, optimize your website for these browsers, and then include a prominent disclaimer on all of the pages on your site optimized for browsers X and Y, versions A and B. This might cost you some traffic, but it isn't likely to be a significant drain on your potential revenue. CSS. A recent development in the field of web design is the popularity of CSS formatting. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets and can be thought of as a series of rules for the browser to follow when interpreting HTML. For example, the basic HTML A tag always formats hyperlinks in the same way, blue underlined Times New Roman text. You can manually change the font, color, and size of this text every time you use the A tag in your files, yes, but this gets time-consuming and is limited in its possible effects. CSS files, by contrast, can actually change the definition of the A tag for your browser. For example, you might write a CSS sheet that defines the A tag as invariably green, Arial, bold, and without the standard underline. With a little bit more effort, you might even define rules for the A tag that allow it to change color or become highlighted whenever the user's mouse moves over the hyperlink, a cool little feature that, if done well, can add to the look and feel of your page without costing you any effort or violating any of our 3 basic rules. CSS programming isn't as difficult as hardcore programming languages like Java, true, but it's still substantially less forgiving than HTML and thus requires a much greater investment of time to learn and use effectively. If you want to experiment with CSS, be sure to give yourself some time to learn the syntax of the language, work out your page implementation, and be sure that you don't go overboard and make your design either confusing or unattractive. You might also do some web searches for CSS layouts. There are plenty of CSS formatting packages available for free online, including professional suites by design studios released for promotional purposes, and of course you can always look at other people's CSS files and get some ideas about how to implement your own, as long as you don't directly steal someone's hard coding work. Plain text HTML versus authoring tools. Building a web page from the raw HTML file up can be deeply rewarding as an intellectual challenge, but is certainly the most cost-effective solution and gives you total control over the look and feel of your page. But it can also be extremely time-consuming not only to build, but to maintain. If you want to radically revise your product information at some point, you'll have to go back in and change lots of very specific HTML formatting in your raw text file. Not the most effective option, certainly. An alternative to text authoring is to invest in an actual HTML authoring tool like Dreamweaver or FrontPage. These have significant drawbacks, of course, not least of which are the very high price and the lack of total control over your website. But they do allow you to change your text through copying and pasting without changing the basic formatting or underlying HTML code for every single HTML file you use, and they simplify some of the more complex layout coding that you might choose to use to make your page look more stylish and unique. Some HTML authoring tools actually give you the best of both worlds. Dreamweaver, for example, lets you edit the basic HTML coding of a page at the same time as you edit the page text, images, and layout directly without manually changing HTML tags, which can satisfy both the desire to work quickly and efficiently and the desire to have total control over a page's layout. Any tool, however, is only as good as the person who uses it. So just use the tools that you prefer and that work the best for your coding style. If this sounds complicated, it's because DIY coding is complicated. There are definite benefits to it, of course, but for many business owners, those benefits aren't worth the time invested in learning the language. And even if you know HTML and CSS backwards and forwards, you might believe that your basic design skills can't give you exactly what you want for your company's website. If this describes you, then move directly along to our next chapter, where we talk in detail about just how to find, evaluate, and hire a coder or designer who can help your website and your product along with it stand out from all the rest. 5. Finding a coder. In the last chapter, we gave you a great deal of information about the basics of HTML coding, browser theory, tag management, browser interoperability, and the more advanced coding world of CSS. In fact, we gave you so much information that some of you may have decided, on the strength of the last chapter alone, to give up on coding and look for an outside coder instead. That's perfectly fine, and even those of you who have substantial HTML CSS experience might be interested in finding a coder in order to save time or to give a website a certain look or feel of which you aren't yet technically capable. So let's get started on learning how to find the perfect coder for you. What to look for. The most important quality to look for in a coder is experience. This is true of almost any job, yes, but it holds especially true for any job that involves producing goods rather than simply providing services, and websites are actual goods. And as valuable as experience is for, say, a carpenter, the value of experience is at least doubled for programmers. If a carpenter builds a bookcase incorrectly, the potential damage is limited to your books falling over, while if your website coder builds the website incorrectly, you stand to lose massive business, compromise the security of your commerce system, or even expose your web server and thousands of computers besides to nasty viruses or worse. If you look for a coder based on credentials alone, a degree from a design institute, for example, or a certification course, then you ensure that you have someone who at least knows about all the concepts that website design and coding requires. But you can't be sure your coder will know what to do in a real-world situation where things can and do go wrong as often as possible. So if at all possible, get someone who's done HTML work before and save yourself some problems down the road. It's also important to choose your coder based on the kind of experience they have. You don't necessarily have to choose a coder who's done direct response site work before. If you followed our instructions in Chapter 3, your sitemap should be good enough to communicate to your coder exactly what your site needs to maximize your conversion rate. But it can be helpful, especially if your coder has resolved some direct response site problems before and can help your site avoid similar problems. What you do need is a coder with substantial HTML experience, especially experience with sites that involve integrated commerce systems. Buyers will forgive a few lapses in the composition of your page, but lapses in your commerce system interfere with the simplicity of the buying process, potentially compromise buyer security and the security of your own accounts, and give your site an extremely bad name, and thus a low conversion rate. Depending on how you've designed your site and sitemap, you may want to hire a coder based on CSS, Flash, or Java experience as well. If your site design calls for effects that only these types of coding can provide, see the previous chapter for a quick discussion of what CSS can do that HTML can't. You'll certainly want a coder who can bring those skills to your project. Even if your site doesn't explicitly call for these skills, consider hiring a designer with experience in this area anyway. You don't know how you might choose to revise your page in the future, and if you do decide to incorporate some advanced styling or effects in a later iteration of your page, you'll want to use the same coder in order to ensure a greater familiarity with the material and an idea about the specific problems that may arise from implementing more complicated layers of coding. What's more, a good CSS, Flash, Java coder can suggest ideas for improving your website that you may not yourself have thought of. For example, you might be using a proprietary commerce system in order to handle your online orders until you meet a coder who can create a more secure, easier-to-use commerce system with no service charges and that goes with your overall site design. A good CSS coder can also overhaul the look of your page with comparatively little effort, bringing in more paying customers and usually giving them a better experience of your page. Whatever qualifications your coder has, it's always a good idea to check out all of the sites they've worked on, as well as any HTML examples they include in their portfolio. Take a look at the kind of work your prospective coder does. Are there any special layout tricks that they tend to use over and over? Any stylistic choices that you just don't like? Does the site work well, or is it confusing to navigate or use? Don't overthink this part of the hiring process. If you navigate your potential coder's portfolio on instinct, you can get a closer approximation of how your eventual customers will use sites designed by that coder. And unless the site is simply a mess, either functionally, stylistically, or in terms of navigation, don't necessarily take the coder out of consideration. What you might perceive to be a personal lack of taste or foresight could easily be a result of bad decisions taken on the part of this coder's former clients. As long as you're providing the basic sitemap and stylistic ideas, and as long as the coder obviously knows what he or she is doing on some level, you can avoid the pitfalls your competitors might have made and ensure that your site will be successful and striking. Although it's often overlooked, there's one factor you should take into account when choosing a coder: his or her personality. This isn't as much of a consideration for short-term website project like the average direct response website, but depending on your business plan, a coder with a good personality can be an asset in the long run. As we'll talk about in a later chapter, you're likely at some point to want to do some revision on your site, whether to add new products, resolve some functionality issues, or just to give the site a nice graphical overhaul. And it's far easier to make these kinds of changes if you know and trust your coder already. Easier on you since you don't have to go to the trouble of searching out and hiring a new coder, and easier on the coder since they already know your basic business plan, site needs, and preferences, and they also know their own code well enough to start working on your revisions immediately without having to spend a great deal of time familiarizing themselves with someone else's work. Where to find coders. So now you know what you want to look for in a coder, but a much greater problem for many people is the problem of where to find the perfect coder for your project. It isn't simply a matter of posting an advertisement in the local classified section and waiting for responses. That might get you some potential candidates, but it removes one of your best tools for assessing the suitability of a coder: the portfolio. One useful method is to post your project on freelancing programming sites, one of the most prominent of which is rentacoder.com. Rentacoder.com allows software buyers, such as yourself, to post details of your project on their directory of projects, along with some idea as to the rate you're willing to offer. Coders can then bid on your project, giving you portfolio examples, any certifications they may have, and their ideal rate for the work. Once you've checked out what they can do, you can approve their bid, place your payment in escrow, and just wait for the coding work to be done. As soon as the coder sends you the work, and as soon as you approve it, the money is released to the coder, and you can both go on your ways, your coder with his cash and experience, and you with your functioning direct response website. There are a number of advantages to this method. Most importantly, there's the wide talent pool from which to choose. Just as putting your business on the internet gives your product a much wider potential audience than you could achieve through traditional channels, looking for contract employees, like coders, over the internet gives you a much wider selection and a much greater chance of finding someone with the perfect skills for your job. Additionally, services like rentacoder.com greatly simplify the process of interviewing potential coders and determining prices. Most of the things that you need to know about a coder, namely their skills and their price, is available at the rental site, just waiting for you to sort through the options and make your decision. But it's important to keep in mind some of the disadvantages to services like rentacoder.com as well. For one, it's very difficult to get a good sense about a potential coder's personality from their rentacoder.com profile or even their skill set. Again, this isn't a problem for short-term work, but as we've discussed, the ideal relationship with a coder is a long-term relationship. Not only does rentacoder.com make it more difficult to create such a relationship by masking coder personalities, but it also makes it more complicated to hire a coder on an ongoing basis. Rentacoder.com only allows you to bid on a coder for a single project, such as a single website with no simple provision for providing ongoing work. Fortunately, these obstacles aren't insurmountable. It just requires more work on your part in order to build and nurture a relationship with your coder. Rentacoder.com automatically releases personal details like phone number and email address for all projects above $500, allowing you to contact your coder directly once the project is in motion, unfortunately. Before the hiring process, or if your design work costs less than $500, which it shouldn't, see below, you can post messages to your coder on the Rentacoder.com message boards or chat rooms, which is the ideal way to contact them, and there's nothing that says you can't ask for a phone number or email address in such communications to help you make the informed decision before renting a coder. Are there other options? Of course. There's always classified advertising on or offline. There are personal references from other business contacts. There's the possibility of emailing the designers of high-profile sites that you've seen and liked, and there's the ubiquitous Craigslist posting. But as long as you're willing to put in the effort to build a personal relationship with your coder and to assess their personality and skills before hiring, sites like Rentacoder.com simply offer too much variety and too much talent to ignore altogether.